be showing a couple of slides, a slideshow, and a couple of different presentations. One is called Development and Planning, and the next one, which is part of this, so it's a breakaway out of this slideshow, is called Economic Development. We'll move through them fairly quickly, and you are free to interrupt if you want and ask questions as we go. We'll try to move through them. The purpose of these shows for the public listening in and watching is to set up or be a preview to another show that will occur later today at the full council meeting on a proposal for the Spark Commission. So these are shows that have already been compiled by the City of Alexandria. They have already been released as public records some time back. They involve slides and presentations that were given to the City Council at the retreat and already were included as well in written documents the city has that have been dispersed throughout time. So there's nothing new in the sense of what the council has reviewed or seen, and indeed some of these presentations beyond the retreat have been presented by the Office of the Mayor, by me, by others, and I think even citizens have made a few requests so far. In fact, I gave one the other day to someone on a little SCSI drive to take and use. So this is a public record. Anybody is free to use them. If folks decide that they want to use any information contained in these two PowerPoint presentations, they need only provide us with a clean disk that has to still be in the package so that we can determine that it hasn't been used, and we will format it and put these items on there, and we welcome citizens to use these things if they have presentations for businesses that may wish to locate or anything else to give our folks an idea of what's happening in Alexandria. So with that, we'll start with development and planning. As you can see, it's dated February 08. The information in it goes back some degree past that, indeed probably all the way to the transition period. And of course, some of the notions that were the transition looked at go back 10 and 15 and 20 years. So the information in here, although compiled in a new fashion, will not always present new information. Regionalism. Alexandria needs to be focused on regionalism, and we think there are three main attributes to true regionalism in this area. First of all, you probably have to define what it means. There are lots of talks about, is it the parish? It's something, of course, beyond Pineville and Alexandria, but is it the parish? Is it a metropolitan statistical area? What is a region that we should be focused on? Most of us believe that Central Louisiana is, of course, a much larger region to deal with. Central Louisiana being some between 5 and 9 parishes. When we talk about health care and things that we want to establish primacy in, or that we have already established primacy in with regard to our hospitals and who we serve, most folks err on the side of thinking it's not 5, but up to 9 parishes that this Central Louisiana is actually serving through Alexandria and Pineville's hospitals and all the ancillary businesses. So it's important to try to figure out what regionalism means. For Alexandria, there are two parts that we think as a policy consideration. Addressing proposals considering the city and region, not just one area. So think regionally, think in this broader fashion. But then related to that is this second bullet point of recognizing our regional role and responsibilities. So we have to determine what is our regional role in this. If we are a big tax base generator, if we have all of these other things recreation-wise that Alexandria does, we need to recognize that with that, there are responsibilities, and that responsibility, we think, means to be a leader in the region. And it also means to do things that allow help to flow to our other townships, villages, and municipalities in a very significant manner. That's how you promote regionalism. It can't just be lip service for us. It has to be a real promotion. It is interesting that the tax reallocation issues have come up during this time because there is this big push for regionalism. Those kinds of things, of course, test the resolve of everybody and how you press forward with regionalism. So while this presentation is not about reallocation, it is certainly a timely issue and one that has to be explored to make our region better, to make our region address all citizens in a fair and equitable manner. So if you look at the two bullets that are related, one being the first being the general notion of regionalism, the second being Alexandria's specific role in that, Then the third is really the simple way you achieve regionalism, and that is through partnering with political subdivisions to solve common problems. It can be as small as sending a flusher truck to a smaller township or village to help them because they have an emergency situation with backup and potential flooding. It can be as large as riverfront development between two cities. So there's a whole range or continuum within which or upon which this partnering can occur. Community-based growth. This slide is simply to show, I guess, the tenets really of community-based growth. I use the term community-based growth. Lots of folks use the term smart growth or smart planning. Associated terms are smart coding. There are lots of different versions of what we would call smart growth. I remind citizens that smart growth really isn't a new concept at all. Indeed, before the proliferation of the automobile, which took folks away from urban centers, before the two big world wars, of course, there was a very big notion of what we now call smart growth. In other words, planning at the turn of the century, or at 1900, was done very similarly to how these new smart growth advocates talk about planning. So there's really nothing new about it. It's a return back to a way that cities used to be planned before automobiles took us away and out to the suburbs, before there was a move away from urban cores. And there are, of course, lots of factors that contribute to that. One of the ironies is that, to some extent, health-related concerns, living real close together before technology allowed what it allows now, was something that was less desirable. Whereas now, because of our medical technology, some of those concerns aren't as present. Plus, we know now that over that period of time, from the 50s through the 70s and then on the 80s and 90s, this moving away from urban centers has caused our infrastructure to stretch. We always talk about in Alexandria being a city that's around a 50,000 population that stayed somewhere between 40 and 50 for decades, and yet our city has grown from 9 or 10 square miles to 27 square miles, 3 times the size. Mr. Bonnette is present here, who is a writer for the Town Talk, and did an interview with me and many others recently about what infrastructure costs are. We now know from statistics that infrastructure costs are increasing, that investment in infrastructure dollars is perhaps one of the best investments cities can make, and most importantly, because of changes in how infrastructure is funded, which used to be a federal funding mechanism, cities are having to go right back to what we just talked about, and that's partner with other political subdivisions. The reason being, you can't get it done without leveraging dollars, and we talk about that a lot here. So again, community-based growth. Planning, which doesn't mean it has to be so strict that there's no movement, but it does mean that you should think about where you're going and why, and not let developments just occur sporadically or at the developer's whim. So there's a big continuum there of what that means. Transportation, critical. Thinking about where transportation will go, and also moving transportation in the direction in which you wish to go as a community. Because we all do see the phenomenon sort of related to if you build, they will come. That's not always true, but certainly you see Lafayette and other places that have stretched out their transportation infrastructure, and development occurs along those corridors. Economic development, I call it a very amorphous term. It really has a very broad meaning. It's very hard to get your mind and hands around it because it can mean so many different things. Indeed, it can mean all the other bullet points there can be a part of economic development. Some folks treat it separately. The classical definition of economic development was concerned with land, capital, how things are acquired, how wealth is acquired, whereas the new definitions concern itself with quality of life and those kinds of things. Housing is a big part, community development, natural resource development. That latter one is what we're talking about when we think about Spark or riverfront development and what things may have to happen or should happen in our city and in our region. Development around natural resources is a critical thing to consider. We encourage you to look at Chattanooga, for example, and other cities that have harkened back to natural resources and centered a lot of development on those items. They provide important lessons both for and against, but mostly I think on balance, development centered on big natural resources you have is almost a can't go wrong. Look at our port, look at what's happening with recreation on the river, look at other cities that do the same thing, and you'll find that when you go back to that thing that probably originally brought people to settle this area, which is the river, you have an identity there and something that not only is related to your quality of life and recreation, the softer things, but also creates real dollars in terms of trade and commerce, which the port is a great example of, that being the Port of Alexandria right here. There are talks now about expanding the port. All of those things are being discussed to make it more regional, again, consistent with these notions of regionalism. Planning. This is very important. The city has implemented this new policy. We call it the annexation policy. And what it simply means is that unless you answer this first public safety item, that you can go forward. Unless the police, fire, other infrastructure, water, sewer, electric, unless they tell you that all those division heads in the city sign off and say, yes, we can move out to that area, you should question annexation. And the important thing here is if you don't answer public safety positively or affirmatively, you don't get to the next two. If you answer public safety in the affirmative, in other words, it will not be too taxing and we can provide fire, police, water, sewer, all those things, then you go to the next item, which we call smart growth. Really, it just means, is this request for annexation consistent with existing planning? If it's not, then you're on a continuum again. It's a reasonableness test. And lastly is aesthetics, which of course is weighted the least. So there's an order to those three items. Aesthetics meaning, how does it look and feel? Does it fit with how we want to see our community? We're obviously not in the business of telling every developer, you can't do this because we don't think it's pretty enough or something. So it's nothing that arbitrary. That's why it's the last one. But certainly if a junkyard was proposed to be somewhere that really bothered a lot of folks, but it could legally be done, and I'm not saying that they can. There's a lot of rules about junkyards, but if that happened, obviously that's an aesthetic consideration that might be weighted more than some other aesthetic consideration. So again, the order is public safety, does it fit with existing planning, or smart growth, aesthetics. The next item is a little more broad, or is a little broader rather, master planning. We need to think about future land use, how we preserve natural and cultural resources. That's where we are today. That's what this discussion is about, is master planning. Does it mean we need another master plan? Does it need do we need to hire more consultants to do master planning? We're going to present some notions about that throughout today to suggest that no, that's not what we're proposing here. The whole notion of doing a Spark Commission or anything related to it is to take all the existing planning and put that in a compiled version that is community up, meaning back to community-based planning, where the community looks at community-based growth and decides what it wants to do for itself based on these existing plans. We think that we have a lot of that in the office. Sometimes some of those have dust on them. You have to shake them off and start using them, and we'll have some specific slides on that. Green space and walkability, self-explanatory. You'll notice that a lot of new plans for developments include a preservation of green spacing, even including specific coding that requires a ratio of green space to concrete, a ratio of green space to other aspects of the development. Walkability is included now in a lot of smart growth notions because we want people to start walking. If you're inviting people back to an urban core, or even creating little mini urban cores in subdivisions, little areas where people can congregate and have sort of a village atmosphere, you want walkability. You want to decrease the need for automobiles, which they add a lot of things. They add pollution, they add other things that affect our health. So as I pointed out earlier, we're in this ironic twist where we're coming back to things that we did at the turn of the century as a result of really technology and the automobile allowing us to move away from urban cores. Mixed use developments, PUDs and DUCs. Planned urban development is the acronym, and diverse use corridor. Diverse use corridors are much like just the general term mixed use development. It means that you identify ahead of time a corridor and allow several uses to occur. In other words, you could have some residential, you could have some commercial and light industrial, all three existing in the same place, right next to each other. at some point, cities quit doing that because of health and safety reasons. You wanted to have your factories on one end of town, you wanted to have your neighborhoods separate. Because of technology now, again, we're allowed to start going back to a little more diversity in how developments are done. Planned urban developments is really just a simple acronym to mean that you develop an item within the city's core or just outside of it ahead of time. It simply means that you're doing this by planning instead of it just happening and you sort of find out where you go along the way. A general term, mixed-use development, would encompass both of those items. Parks, playgrounds, and recreation, we need to do more planning for it, but we also need to make sure the ones that we have now are up to par. And that's really the biggest thing that we have. We have a lot of great green space in the city of Alexandria and, of course, in the Pineville area, and we want to make sure that anything that we're doing in our region reflects the notion of making sure those parks, playgrounds, and recreation serve the folks they are intended to serve and are in the best shape they can be. Transportation, I won't spend much time. These are items that we're thinking about in the city for those folks watching. Expansion and infill is back in a sense to that annexation thought. The more you expand, the more you have to think, are you stretching our infrastructure more than it can handle? My suggestion is, yes, we've been expanding the infrastructure too much, and we think we have the science to back up that statement. Infill is the notion of developing the core that exists. For example, take existing housing stock within the city. We would rather incentivize and offer those incentives to people who want to develop inside of the existing city jurisdiction than offer those same things to folks to come outside and ask to be annexed. The reason being, it helps not tax the infrastructure and it redevelops existing stock that otherwise is dead weight on the city that will cause us to have to spend more money later. I would rather take neighborhoods on a personal, as my personal philosophy, in the lower third corridor and other places and put money into developing that existing stock than doing a lot of new developments. Does that mean you do no new developments? Of course not. But it means you think about where we should be developing. We think about notions of contiguity, meaning that we think about it has to be already contiguous to the city rather than annexing a piece of land way away from the city and having to bring infrastructure out to meet it. Communication is a must. I think that although we've made some strides, we probably are still behind. Alexandria should be competing at a higher level on its communication, whether we're talking about cyber connection or otherwise. Those things need to be developed. You've seen us talking about trolleys, the notion there, of course, being that when we invite, for example, all of these folks to play in World Series in different events, we could have a system set up to allow them to go around our city and really survey what we have to offer. We could offer that through transportation that, while it would involve an upfront expense from the city, would be more than paid for given the amount of people that you're serving and are offering services to bring to the city. Now, just a quick example. When we land some of these World Series events, you can talk about from 2,000 to 4,000 or more people coming to your city for an excess of 4 to 5 days. That means you get to credit them with spending the night and using your hotel rooms. Well, it's an accepted multiplier to use $140 per person per day. So if you take 4,000 people over 6 times 6 days times 140, that's a significant number. And if you want to be conservative, and I tend to be this way on that, divide it in half. Or if you even want to be more conservative, take a fourth of that number that you just multiplied and think about that adding to this city and this region. And when you look at those numbers, the expense of doing some of the things you hear us talk about, like trolleys or tours around the city, really pales in comparison. And so when folks say, well, we don't need to be investing in that, that's money we could do with something else. The idea is you're making a small investment to get a big gain on the other end. Outer looping and inner looping, very important. Inner looping, for the folks listening and watching, is the term we use to describe Versailles, Sugar House Road, all of those items that create pathways that didn't exist to interloop our city. So Jackson Street will now be connected to MacArthur. It used to cause you to think about the route you would take if you were at or around the Coliseum to go to BJ's Pizza, for example. Think about how you would have to do that, and think about how that will be resolved by this. This notion of looping joins places in the city. The more you allow people to transport themselves more freely and with greater ease and less in traffic, the more people tend to shop, the more they tend to do a whole bunch of other things that help cities. That's inner looping. Outer looping is very expensive and takes a long time. There are notions about an outer loop through the whole region, a giant circle around the whole Alexandria-Pineville area. There are also notions of a not quite that expansive that would involve maybe a loop, a 49 loop and other things to move growth of the city around. Let's say the bottom of MacArthur as you head out to Baton Rouge and on up toward where it would meet Highway 28 and on up toward the top of I-49 as it heads out to Shreveport. Economic development, I'm going to just go through these. Coordinated lobbying schedule, that's in the works. We've been doing a lot of that in some of the travels we've taken. Know folks feel strongly, sometimes one way or another, about trips to Washington and all of those things, but the truth of the matter is there's a lot that gets done on those trips. You want to ensure as citizens and taxpayers that the folks doing that are the old saying, I guess you're not supposed to say anymore, is bringing home the bacon, but you want to ensure that that's occurring. And there is a lot to going there and going to Baton Rouge, paying attention to what bills are going through committee and making sure that you are represented. Increasing diversity by closing the how-to gap. I think perhaps one of the most important things we can do as a community is to consider that apart from, well, two things. One, diversity makes money. Diversity brings better programming, and it brings citizens from all walks to the same table to share in the economic pie. If you're not doing that, you are perhaps, and I think always, missing out on the opportunity to have ideas generated from other folks that either institutionally or historically were not included. Obviously, we identify in our area that there are racial concerns that we want to identify and help to promote people being able to come and participate in our diverse area, but also gender concerns, women-owned businesses, those things. With that in mind, we have started a program in our small business program that aims to address these diversity concerns. That program has been discussed in the paper and on the news quite a few times in the last few months, and there will be some new things being discussed about it in short fashion. Central Louisiana Film is known as CLIF. There are lots of things that have been discussed about that recently also, and we'll do some presentations separately on that in the future. Establishing an economic development plan, that's coming up. That's the next slideshow. Plan, redevelop, and enhance the inner core in downtown. That's going to also come up with the Sparks slideshow this evening. Gateways, that will also come up in the Spark slideshow this evening. Very important. Physical and figurative gateways. Physical meaning areas or entranceways into the city. We can do a lot to improve those, ladies and gentlemen. They just don't look that good. We also have a problem with signage that's related to gateways, both as you come into our city and if you need to be directed around. As Alexandrians, we tend to know where we need to be and go. When someone comes from out of town, we really need to do a better job of being able to direct them places. Public and private collaboration we've talked about, and we'll be talking about some more. Housing. These are all important notions. What is affordable? Believe it or not, there's no agreement on what that means from a federal definitional standpoint to the state to local areas. And then when you talk to the community, it gets really a lot more clouded, because our community folks are the first to tell you that sometimes what government or what I would call top-down analysis gives is very different from community up. And so this is an important item. In the future, this slide that you're looking at, ladies and gentlemen, will be developed into a whole nother presentation that involves a financial intermediary program, the AFEE program that we just talked about, which is in part to close this how-to gap. We also will be talking about, in this affordable housing, how to enlist corporate partners. There are different federal laws in place that can allow a lot of help from the banking community to others to reinvest dollars in communities. even and up to and including banks being able to do things that from a regulatory sense, they're not allowed to do directly to a potential customer or borrower, but through these agreements can do. And so we want to enlist corporate partners to assist in that. And again, this slide alone will generate in the very near future a whole new not just presentation, but notion about how we can help resolve some of our housing issues here. We also are going to start a certification program we have for those who wish to collaborate, nonprofits, to increase accountability from those groups, but we're not going to add that burden to those folks without giving something. If you complete the program, we're going to allow the city to pay your certification if you complete an acceptable certification program within the city. And then with the aim that you would be able to partner with the city, we'll increase our deliverables to those groups that do that. And so the incentive will certainly be there to collaborate with the city, but it'll mean you have to have a plan. It will mean that we'll play a close look at the percentage of dollars that go to, for example, the employment end versus the deliverables end. We want to see folks meeting their employees or soliciting that through churches and others, handling that aspect of it, how people are paid and all. We would like to see our money go more directly into the programming aspect. What that balance or mix is, we're not saying that that's going to be the same every time, but that's what we're looking to see. Community development, we talked about the first item. Examine and enhance existing services. You've seen examples of this with LSUA, increasing the bus service out there. It looks like that was a very good plan to do. At first, some folks will say, well, if you've added this many people and the service has to do this, let's look at the cost. Remember, our bus service, right now, it's not a moneymaker, and it probably never will be. But we get significant transportation dollars for it, and it adds to things that you don't necessarily see on the balance column. In other words, if you draw the line down the page and you look at the expense of the buses versus what they bring, it's a lot harder to do that than people think. Having that transportation in place allows a lot of folks to get to and from work and to go to school. There's no way for us to sit here today and tell you the economic impact that has, but we believe it greatly outweighs the loss, if you will, to having a bus system in our area. Redevelop the inner core corridors. We're going to talk a lot about that as we go into these other slideshows. Collaborations with learning institutions, libraries, concerts, art museums, and exhibits. Honor Bonton is a good example. Gwendolyn Y. Elmore does a great job. We just had Jazz on the River this past weekend, and it was a wonderful event, and that was the 13th annual version of that event. There are lots of things that we can do with learning institutions. LSUA and the city are collaborating right now to fix problems at the incubator, to address multiple other business center and educational workforce needs. That is going to continue. We had a great relationship with Dr. Caffey. We had a great relationship and still do with the interim Chancellor Tom Armstrong, who's now been replaced by the new Chancellor. And he mentioned to me the other day in passing when the governor was in town that he knew some of those things that were going on and was very excited to continue them. So we look forward to having those things happen, many of which were started by the Chancellor before Caffey took over, who has been a great friend of this community, and we look forward to continuing those things. Natural resource development, we're going to cover these and some other ones. Most people don't realize this, Alexandria was named a top wilderness town. It's a pretty big honor to get, and I think a lot of people didn't know that, and from our standpoint, I guess we owe an apology for not promoting and getting that out enough. We need to do a better job of that. Conservation neighborhoods, brownfields, we have the Ruston Foundry, and we probably have a few others, and maybe have some that are unknown at this point. But Alexandria is, like a lot of cities our size, has issues with brownfields. We look to the Ruston Foundry Superfund site being able to bring not only redevelopment, but perhaps some things that never existed before. It's almost new development instead of just redevelopment. Ruston Foundry really offers some opportunities that we will address in a separate presentation in the next coming months, probably in the next month. Master Parks Plan, this is happening right now, so that we actually have a plan of how to use each park and how they fit in the city. Litter ordinance, we've been talking about somewhat. There are notions about doing a regional litter court. Alexandria, of course, has a city court, so we're more capable and able to handle some of these things. There is a litter ordinance proposed that changes how we deal with litterers, and I think that you're going to see that coming online very shortly. Other development issues, we talked about some of these. Suddenlink renewal has sparked some controversy and caused people to do exactly what that's designed to do. You have community meetings, you talk about how to best serve the needs of folks. That's all written into the federal law and how it occurs, and that's happening right now. For the citizens who saw the other day, there was a renewal of the Suddenlink agreement. It was a renewal only to keep us in place until we can have our full meetings. It was, I think, a 6-month extension, if I'm correct. I may need to be corrected on that, but I think it was 6 months. Fiber optics is a major concern for us and what we need to do, and you're going to start seeing a lot of presentations from the administration staff on that. Unified Development Code and code enforcement go hand in hand. Those items are about to be released as well. We are looking at making sure that there's almost a one-stop place to go in our code so everything is together and you know what to do. It seems like it would always be that way, but over time, you tend to start legislating and putting ordinances in different places, so it was a convenient time, I guess, with the new administration to come back and put them all back in one place. It also helps organizationally, and it helps to enforce, because then your code officers know exactly where to go, and they're not having to interpret conflicting code articles. And we have a lot of that in the city. Not just in terms of code enforcement traditionally, but you have a lot of ordinances that can conflict over time. It's a natural part of the process of government that occurs. It happens at the state level. It certainly happens at the federal level. So you just got to deal with it as you find those items. Is our infrastructure prepared for growth? Definitely another slideshow and another time. I've always felt, at least since coming in, that the one place where we had some soundness was all of the good work that's going into our infrastructure. I still feel that way. But as Mr. Bonnette's pointed out in a few articles and looking at the Cure Group and Ms. Donica, both from the Town Talk, and I think you're starting to see the rest of the media picking up on that and doing interviews and talking about it. We do have issues. And as you see Cure, that commission, trotting out those issues, it is going to become apparent what we've come to discover in the city, and that is that if you ask that question directly, is our infrastructure prepared for growth, and you said, Mr. Roy, you can only give one answer, yes or no, I would have to say no. And that is something that's hard to have to say, but it is the truth, and that is what we need to be focused on at this point. Almost more than anything is how are we going to resolve the infrastructure needs to allow us to do all these other things that we're talking about doing. You can't talk about economic development in the dream items if you can't get your infrastructure in place. Okay, 1 second. We'll be able to move through this one a little quicker. We broke out of the other slideshow economic development as a separate item. What is successful development? We don't think it's measured by new buildings, but how you look at the improvement to the entire city, and it has to be a unified effort. We would extend this notion, of course, to our whole region. So you can substitute region with city there. Focusing on neighborhoods at the same time as downtown development is critical. And what does that really mean? It means if you focus a lot on downtown, you're going to find that some folks who don't live in the downtown area, they're going to complain because they want to see you focusing on their particular neighborhood. That is a part of government, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, the district councilmen are going to always be in that hard place. They're going to always be in a situation where they have to first represent a district and then come and sit down and say, okay, how does this fit in with the entire vision for the city? And that is a natural part of the legislative and executive branch, having to come together and figure out how you move forward on those items. It is also a place where you're going to see some friction and rubbing here and there. I've always said that I believe that that was clearly intended by the founders of this country, and that is part of the democratic republic that we live in America. I think there's nothing wrong with that. It's a good thing. You just have to make sure that you don't do a lot of that and you get more done in the checkoff column. And so that's what we need to be focused on in general. How are we making our neighborhoods better, and how are we at the same time thinking of the bigger development items to move the whole city? And we've identified downtown development I really like to think of it more as riverfront development, of which the downtown is a part of, than calling it downtown development. And you'll start to see a shift in the policy and approach of the administration. You'll start noticing that downtown is dropped, and that's not just a figurative thing. It's because it really is about the whole riverfront, which covers more than just downtown. How do you do it? Forming partnerships, we talked about in the other show. We also talked about leveraging dollars. We also talked about the regional effort with regional planning, and that's important. We have to fit. This whole notion of doing something with Pineville is because we think we ought to fit both places together, and you can maximize leveraging of dollars. Working with the state, we have to do that. This we talked about in the last set. Alexandria is a gateway. We talked about it being the physical gateway issues in the other show. This is about the figurative gateway issues. Are we a gateway to businesses all around the region? Can they come to Alexandria if you are doing something in Leesville or somewhere else and get help? We ought to provide that. We ought to provide that to every township, village, and other muni that's in our immediate area. They ought to be able to come here and know that Alexandria is going to provide assistance. We ought to help in selecting sites that are not just in the city. If someone wants to locate here and we can't serve them, we ought to help locate those folks with our Chamber of Commerce and others where they need to be. And we're moving toward a lot better collaboration in that regard. Identification of financing. Ladies and gentlemen, these bullets with identification, provision of startup counseling, business and management training, guidance for minority and women-owned businesses, developer technical assistance. All of this we're hoping to locate in this one-stop shop we're creating at the incubator. So there really will be a place regionally where you can come and you can get all of this help in one place. It will house the AFEET program, which is the guidance for minority and women-owned businesses. It will house the AFII, which is the financial intermediary program, which we're going to do some development on within this month, talk about how that's going to occur. That provides micro lending, ladies and gentlemen. What does that mean? It means that lots of folks who are doing startup businesses, they need less than $50,000. The most common place they get it, and when I talk around the city, I always ask the crowd, where do you think that money comes from if the bank says no? And people kind of think about it. Most of the time they get it right. Credit cards. It comes from credit cards. Imagine the interest rates that people are paying for startup on their credit cards. Micro lending allows you to lend less than $50,000 and even lower than that, $5,000, $15,000. And it also allows you to borrow money where you might not meet what the bank is willing to do. You might fall right out of those 700s on your credit score and go into right below that, but well above where you should be in the risk category where no one would lend. That's what financial intermediation is all about. It's about having a middleman in there to help you do that. Banks want it. We have a lot of partners with our local bankers. You're going to see some things really happening there. The other program associated with this gateway notion is ABA, and that's the Alexandria Bonding Assistance Program. That means that you have a lot of folks out there, contractors, who are ready, willing, and able to perform, but because institutionally they've been sort of locked out of what other folks have had the benefit of growing up in the area and can do, they need some help to go and get a bond and do things to start a nice construction or development job. We want to provide assistance there. That comes to the state of Louisiana. It exists in the law already, and we're going to have a version of that in Alexandria that will help people. This all goes in conjunction with that closing that how-to gap, helping people who are otherwise ready, willing, and able to work get the same information to perform. So it doesn't have to be race or gender specific. It can be race and gender neutral. And I want people to understand that. We have to do a disparity study to decide if it goes beyond that. But right now, even with neutrality as the starting point, you still don't have the information getting to people who institutionally or historically were locked out of that wealth of information. This city's going to do something about that. We're going to do it through educating folks and presenting material that allows them to know how they can be a vendor for the city, how they can come in and do professional services for the city. Seminars, that's one of the ways that we would do it. I'm going to skip forward. I'll leave it up for a second. Inventory, public and privately owned sites. This is something we've been talking about at the Chamber. This is something Mr. Hess is in charge of doing for our city. So we would have a inventory of all the sites that can be potential for business. We also need to be able to tell people right away what environmental issues exist and other potential what we call deal breakers. You want to be able to identify that early on. Tell people this isn't going to work and get them to the place where they need to be in our region. We have community education, workforce development up. That's also related to some things we've already talked about. If I had to tell the citizens of Alexandria our biggest obstacle, it's the same thing you've seen your governor outline as the biggest obstacle for the state, and indeed it's the same thing you're going to see for the nation. So if you have infrastructure on one end, you have workforce development on the other end of this continuum of big obstacles for us. There is a big crunch coming with our workforce in this country, and citizens may not be aware of that, but in the next few decades, because of the way our population dynamics are working, we're going to have a potential shortfall of dealing with our workforce needs on a level that could put us at a global competitive disadvantage. Global competitive disadvantage. There are ways to intercede, and I think that's what you're seeing Governor Jindal do. That was, I think he had a guest editorial, in fact, today on April 22 in the newspaper, or in the last few days. I'm not sure if it was today, but he's talking about this same problem we have on just a same but smaller level right here in Alexandria, Pineville, and in our region. This is something that you don't want to be an alarmist about, but I really feel that citizens do some research on it, read up about it. It's a lot more important and bigger, I think, than most people realize. Again, we're talking about utilization of and improvements to existing infrastructure. For the citizens to know, when this slideshow was developed, the economic development slideshow, it was at least 3 to 4 months before CURE started meeting. If this slideshow were to be developed today, April 22nd, 08, this utilization of and improvements to existing infrastructure would probably be pulled out of that slide and be its own slide, and probably be its own show about just what our infrastructure needs are. That was the idea when the administration asked the council to form CURE. It was to get a real assessment of where we are and let citizens tell us. So no politics in it, nothing else. Where are we? Tell us the truth, what's happening, and we're seeing some of that. And if some of you are paying very close attention to CURE when it says things, there's a whole lot being said in some of those sentences and some of those statements being made. And it is something we have to be concerned about. Alexandria is in the safe zone. What does it mean? It means we're above where you have some of the hurricane worries that other folks in the state have. It means it is an opportunity for us to capitalize when we go out and court business and point out to them that we're in this safe zone. Affordable housing we'll go through quickly because we covered another show, but I do want to highlight one thing. South Alexandria, Mr. Bill Hess wrote this statement, a retail and hospitality desert. That is a true statement. It is something that we have to do to create opportunities for people to want to invest, to come and invest and feel good about those investments. I think with the Spark presentation and other things, you're going to see the city moving toward that in a lot of areas. We have not made part of Spark yet, our South Alexandria plan, because it is so specific and takes so much work that it is the last set that we're going to introduce. So you'll see parts of plans for tonight in different activity corridors. The activity corridor for South Alexandria is going to be something different, and it's going to be something that we hope is creative and addresses a problem that has been serious for some time and hasn't shown until very recently that it's been getting a lot better. And we recognize that, your administration does, and certainly your city council does, and we talk about it, but it's time now to take some action on it. And I think that there are plenty of plans out there on that, and now we need to assimilate those and move forward. Downtown redevelopment, I'll skip forward because you're going to see all of these have now been broken out and are put into the Spark presentation. So if you look at those bullet points that are up there, those will be in that Spark presentation, and folks can look at the parking issues, the riverfront development, somewhat talking about infill, certainly mixed use, and the other two items here are, you can't rely on just emotion. You can't say, well, this piece of property we have to bring back, or this piece of property must do this, or nothing will work. You can't have that attitude. You have to think about, all right, how does it fit? And even though there are certain items that are emotional to us, there are historical items and other things that we think of both in the downtown area and elsewhere, you have to move away from just purely wishful thinking and move toward some degree of what is practical and how do you bring them back. But I would always suggest this, in reading different treatises and information on these subjects. If you look at the riverfront as a natural resource, if you look at the Bentley Hotel, those kind of things do have a standalone aspect to them. In other words, addressing those things can be catalytic. They could be a catalyst for a whole move for other things. And so it's important to remember that when you talk about redevelopment, that there are items that are big in and of themselves and can make movement happen. Housing associated services, retail, and grocery. It's all great, but there may be other events that happen that have to happen before you get there. It's a chicken and egg argument. Retail and groceries aren't going to locate unless there's a reason for them to locate. And we have some specific notions about how to do that. We'll finish up now. The transition team questions. This is what the transition team for the administration asked. Those were the questions. The team spent about 2 hard weeks or 3 weeks studying different things. These were the questions they asked. These were the answers to some of those questions. So they're each broken out. The first is assets. You look at I-49, multimodal transportation system. Think about your river, your interstate, your beautiful airport that in a relative sense is second to none in the country that have been built in the last decade or so. Look at all those things and think about what that means for multimodal or how our transportation grid works here. We really are set up to do a whole lot. If Highway 28 eventually becomes I-14, think about what having that T of a north-south I-49 and now an east-west interstate would do for us. Think about Lafayette and other places. Think about where Alexandria is already located in the center of the state and what that could mean for us. Medical community, I believe we serve 8 to 9 parishes. That's a huge item to push for economic development purposes. Why? Jobs tend to be upwardly mobile. Jobs tend to be technology driven, which is where you want to be because of the change and the money involved. And those folks tend to be in a good place for benefits and others. Military presence, very undersung. Think of the economic impact Camp Beauregard has, much less Fort Polk, which is huge. But think about Beauregard right over in Pineville and what it does. And here's 2 more that we didn't put on the slide, but we're going to add. Think of the faith-based impact that the Baptist, there are tons of people in our area. The Pentecostal Church in Alexandria has a big impact. The Baptist building that we've had here for years, and the location and centralization of things here that has been here for years. All of those things make a huge impact. And then the last one that we probably need to add are nurseries. Forest Hill, think of the nurseries. Nobody has given me numbers yet. I'm kind of hunting around for numbers to see what that impact is. We think it's very significant, and another thing that's just not fully known by citizens. So you have military presence. I would add to it faith-based organizations and nurseries. Economic priorities, workforce development. That's the #1 priority. So if you take that economic development notion as this general notion, first thing to address is a more specific notion, workforce development. Existing business retention and expansion, people have to remember, more important than attracting the big fish when you talk about what you have internally is your retention and expansion. Affordable housing, vibrant riverfront, a high-speed internet connectivity, focus on the city becoming attractive to younger ages. This is another breakdown, just kind of looking at those items, who we should be recruiting and using. Again, we've covered these. This is just a sum up of some of those recommendations. This was a very diverse group, ladies and gentlemen. You're talking about 75 people from all different walks of this community, extremely diverse, getting together and over a 2-week period having multiple meetings for many, many hours, then going through an executive committee chaired by Mayor Clarence Fields from across the river and coming up with what you're seeing, this presentation. Citywide recommendations, all of these items happening or completed. Increased zoning and code enforcement, almost complete. Enhanced recreation, that's happening. Improved park management, that's happening. You'll maybe hear some discussions about that tonight. Cultivating the workforce, tremendous amount of work done by Ms. Vaughn Jennings in the administration that hasn't all come out yet, but AFEET, AFII, and ABBA, those programs are all designed to help that. Plus, lots of talks with Dr. Joe May from LCTCS, Louisiana Community and Technical College System. All of these things are being discussed now about how they can help. John Grafton out at the England Authority has had some learning center in place for some time and been a leader out front on these items. So these things are happening and have been happening. The last one that was recommended out of transition was the greater partnership with the city of Pineville. A lot of criticism of Alexandria maybe over the years by others saying, well, Alexandria tends to be unto itself. Alexandrians, I think, always think that everyone else is and they're against Alexandria. I say this, you're not seeing us, but I say that tongue in cheek since you can't see my face. It's kind of a funny notion. The truth is, however that occurs, we do need to increase the partnership because we will gain economically out of that partnership. Conclusions. Again, things we've covered, but those are the things that the transition group said we most need to focus on. Red River for multi-municipal purposes. It's kind of a dual nature, that multi-municipal meaning within the city would have multi-purposes, but also multi-municipal meaning 2 cities, or even more than that, joined on this river and moving forward together. All right, and so with that, we did those items to bring citizens up to speed for what will be presented later this evening. And I'm going to answer questions. Hold on, Mr. Bonnette, 1 second. In other words, I wanted you to see the 2 presentations that the council and all of us have used leading up to the Spark Commission presentation, which will occur tonight if the council so desires. If we run out of time, we may present it some other way. But this would be the presentation that we would talk about tonight with more of a look at regional collaboration. The notion about Spark is not to create, and I want citizens to hear me on this clearly, it is not to create another economic development corporation or entity. That's not the way in which we think our approach should head. In fact, just the opposite. It is to talk about what we need to do to consolidate efforts that already exist among public groups and how they interface with private groups. So the Chamber has another version, CLETA, that is a wider group of different, if you will. We have the Chamber, we have a business league, we have, I think, a group in Pineville now. All of those groups can then come together and they have a group, CLETA. And that's all good. We don't think there's anything wrong with that, but what we're saying is, for Alexandria, there are multiple governmental economic development engines that exist in the downtown area. There are also other groups that are working in the region and doing the same thing. What we'd like to see is someone take all the plans that have been paid for and exist, and I'm going to suggest to you that they're well in excess of $800,000 and that they're well within 15 years old. So somebody ought to be taking those plans and looking at how to consolidate and compile what's in them. And we think citizens can do that. We think citizens not hiring new planners, we've got enough of that. And that's not a negative, that just we have that in place. What we need to do is get citizens together, figure out what things we need to move forward on, and then we need to do it. I hope my planning friends aren't biting their fingernails with me saying that. I will say this, Mr. Moore's a local planner, and he always says we don't need more of that. So this is what we need to do. We have plans. We have plenty of planners in the area. What we need to do is compile the information and start with some action. And that's what SPARK's all about. The acronym, of course, SPARK is I guess, self-explanatory. What it will stand for, we'll see as we develop this over time. There's probably about 15 different things the acronym can mean that are all related. But the notion is, of course, that Spark will be a catalyst for things to come and happen in our area. As you can see there, we have a logo for Spark, which is the state of Louisiana, with a lot of light coming right out of that central area of Alexandria and Pineville. There's no differentiation between the two cities, which was purposefully done to show that we're acting together, and we think that that's important. And indeed, you can see it goes well beyond the two cities to include Rapides Parish and beyond into some of the surrounding parishes. And that's really the idea, is that right there in the center of the state, that's where there should be a lot of activity, and we'd like to see this area be a leader economically in the state instead of letting planning occur outside of it. And so you're going to see us do a lot more in the next 3 and 4 months for community-based planning. We want to host a big event here in Alexandria, but we're going to have planning experts from all over come. There'll be a convention, if you will, where there'll be a lot of discussions about that. I'd like to see it happen at Coughlin Saunders. We'll see. There was one in Baton Rouge at their equivalent to Coughlin, and it was a great event. And we think that Coughlin would be a wonderful place to host such an event over a several-day period and have a lot of people from outside of Alexandria come in, but also allow our folks, this is important, our folks in the city to come and present what they think needs to happen in their city. And we think that that's very important. Again, community up, not government down. Community up, not government down. This presentation for Spark, we hope to have tonight. I'm going to leave this slide up for a moment so people can see what's coming and what this is about. Give a second and folks can read this and think about how this fits into what they want to see happen in their community and what kind of identity issues we face in our community and what they mean. There's a local historian, Father Chad Partain, who's had a lot of interesting thoughts about why Alexandria has or doesn't have an identity, depending on what school of thought you come from. And if any of you know him, I encourage you to call him and talk to him about it. If his phone rings off the hook, Father, I apologize. But I think that he has some very interesting things to say about our community and area. I think Alexandria is not only experiencing a resurgence of community mindedness, but people are community minded here. And so we just need to translate that into a unified vision and purpose and move forward. Thank y'all very much for coming today, and we hope that this was informative for what happens later. There's a lot of information, of course, but hopefully people can watch it on the loop, and they'll get a chance to really think about where the city's going, what that may mean for their neighborhood, their business, their family, and any folks and kids that are off at school, and attracting them to come back home to our area. All right, questions?
In the last slideshow, when you spoke about nurseries and you said that you didn't have any numbers, is that because no one has any numbers, or that you haven't sought out numbers?
I haven't formally sought them out in any way, Tom. I think that, and I'm going to identify everybody. It's Tom Bonnette with the Town Talk asking a question. I haven't sought out any numbers in a formal sense. I was told in the last 3 or 4 days, Tom, by someone who came and said, look, I think that there are some numbers that exist. I would imagine that a lot of the nursery owners know their numbers. I don't know how much they're willing to share or not share.
The Ag Center has some.
And I think that there are some numbers that LSUA and others in the educational realm probably have with regard to the nurseries. I think the numbers are higher than people would assume. I think, of course, in the multi-millions, and I think it's going to surprise some folks.
It's the #1 agricultural generator in Rapides Parish. The nurseries are.
The nurseries are
more than anything
yes.
else.
Yes.
There's been a little bit of flack about public records requests between the Town Talk and yourself. The Spark presentation tonight, you said that the acronym may change. Is that any indication that something has changed with talks with Pineville maybe over some of the controversy surrounding the public records request, and maybe they're not as enthusiastic as they were before about a partnership to develop the Red River. So it may not end up being the
acronym, the meaning of the acronym?
yeah, the strategic proposal with the Alexander Pineville Redevelopment Corporation.
Right.
Maybe it may end up.
I'm glad you asked that question, Mr. Bonnette, because it gives us a wonderful opportunity to point out how the Town Talk has acted throughout this. And since the folks at home will know that I certainly couldn't have created that question being asked, they'll know that they'll know that this is a natural answer coming. You've asked a question about there being a change in what occurred. The whole notion of not giving Spark on the electronic form was to avoid just this situation that we believe the newspaper sort of created. Most of the folks I talk with out in the community say, Mayor, we understand you weren't ready to release it, you're still working on something. When you release something before it's totally finished, that's exactly what happens, is you're going to get a lot of questions that you then work out. The pulling back from Pineville on what it means is not at all the case. In fact, we just gave a full presentation just now that talks about the need to partner with Pineville. It is to allow Pineville to weigh in on what they think the acronym can mean. There have been a lot of notions about it. It could be strategic proposal for Alexandria regional collaboration. It could be strategic proposal for Alexandria Pineville regional collaboration. It could be regional consolidation. It could be redevelopment consolidation. We've thought about 20 different things that fit into Spark, and so we want to make sure that however we do it, everyone is allowed to weigh in who might be a part of it. The question also demonstrates, I think, for the public watching and listening at home, sort of how the dynamic with official positions and the newspaper may work, which is to say that there is no notion of Pineville pulling out or doing anything. This has been a very positive experience. Back in December of 2007, we wrote to Pineville and talked about these things. There have been many discussions since then that have occurred with Pineville. I think the only negative that's surrounding Spark right now has been created by the notion that information is being denied to the Town Talk, which for the record, ladies and gentlemen, is not the case. The information that's contained in Spark and in all the presentations you've seen already exists in other public records. The information has been sent to the newspaper and would be sent to anyone else who requests it. The only thing that was not given to the Town Talk right away when asked for was a pre-existing version of this Spark Commission PowerPoint in the electronic format that it's in. And the reason being because there was concern probably that if that was streamed on the internet or something else happened, we would run into just these problems that we haven't worked out yet. The version you'll see tonight is still a draft version, but because the Town Talk has pressed to see these items, we are certainly willing to accommodate and show where we are with Spark. I wanted to let the citizens know we've given a pre-version of this too. It did certainly include a definition or I think it was strategic proposal for Alexandria Pineville Redevelopment Corporation. The real reason that we've changed that is because we're not sure if a redevelopment corporation is what we need. And it's a tough mechanism to sell because you would have a legal entity that covers both cities, Mr. Bonnette, that would be trying to redevelop areas of both cities. And if you think about it from just a legal standpoint, you think about how you'd appoint those members through 2 different city councils, and then you get into a tough deal about prioritizing which projects. And so we've really kind of thought that the notion of a corporation may not be the right thing. But remember, the whole way this is set up is it's a commission to study whether that should exist at all or not. We also know that the law, and we'll present that, allows you to do these redevelopment, cooperative economic development endeavors without the forming of a corporation. So that's why we backed off of Spark as being a corporation. And we really were still trying to work those out when the Town Talk requested that PowerPoint presentation. We've sent the slides. We offered to send any and all slides we had on paper. I was told that that wouldn't be good enough, that they had to have the actual PowerPoint presentation in electronic form. We have given that format to the Town Talk as of today and this new item as well.
Sorry.
I have one question.
Yes, ma'am.
Are you saying that draft documents, even if they have been discussed publicly in a public meeting, are not public records?
No, I'm not.
Opinion?
No, I've never said that. I think draft documents can certainly be public records.
When you first gave this at a public meeting as a PowerPoint presentation, time constraints prevented you from giving the entire presentation. Was it your intention, if time would have allowed, to have shown the entire PowerPoint?
I was going to say that your suggestion is time constraints prevented that. That's not what my appreciation was. My appreciation was we weren't going to show the whole thing because not all slides had been worked out. As you know, we were there for almost 2 full hours. The time constraints were certainly present. The idea was not to show that at all at that meeting. We had a presentation specifically designed for it. It was called the Rust and Foundry presentation. We wanted to show, just like we're trying to preview today, what things are coming. The presentation today will highlight some things that are coming, and again, will not be the full presentation of Spark because there's so much to this that even when you go through the activity corridors and so forth, there's a lot more information that can be given. But you have to start somewhere, in my estimation, Mr. Bonnette, and the way you tend to start is general to specific, right? Kind of how you write an article, that funneling effect. And so what we would do is this is going to outline the general notions for Spark, and as we get to more specific items, we'll break down presentations on each of those items.
But it was introduced as a public meeting, and your contention has been it was still in use because you still had to revise it.
I've made no contention other than to provide you with the information. Mr. Bonnette, I know the Town Talks, I know you're interested in creating news that doesn't exist, so let me just be as straightforward as I can be. You've been given all the information. I have no contention that you shouldn't have it. We are happy to have given it to you, and we will continue to comply with not only the law, which we've done, we'll continue to comply with what I promised I would do in my campaign, which was go beyond that. I read the editorial with a great degree of interest this weekend on Sunday. I felt that it was probably something that, if it contained all of what the discussions were and all of the items, would have been a fairer view of what has occurred over the past week. I want to reiterate that these questions started only last Monday when this has come out. And for the citizens listening, I've given everything from Post-it notes where we scribbled about Spark. I did personally for the first time. The acronym, if people need to know, I came up with it at home. That has nothing to do with whether it's a public record or not, but that's where I first thought of it. And I wrote it on a Post-it note that I can't determine whether it was a Post-it note from my house or the city, but I've given it all to the Town Talk. I've given the Town Talk everything that we possess on Spark to date that I know of.
Well, my question is getting at, when does something become a public record?
I think that you have attorneys, Mr. Bonnette, who can answer that for you. And certainly they've given their opinions in the newspaper.
You're an attorney and a very smart one. Your opinion is, this letter you gave me today, which was included with the presentation, you say that this was something that was in use. You can always add another slide to a PowerPoint presentation. You can always, it's only become public record once you finish it, even though you're part of it at a public meeting for a particular audience. Once you revise it to show at a different meeting, does it then become public record?
But Mr. Bonnette, I would pose the question back to you. If I have something at a home that we are using, or that I'm using at my house, if I write down an idea on a legal pad in my home that I clearly am going to use for a public purpose, I write the word Spark out at my house on a pad I bought at home, under your definition, because that is prepared for or intended to be for public use, it would fit a public record, particularly if I invited someone over to my house who's a citizen and said, hey, I'm thinking I'm going to do this with this pretty soon. Or if I took the legal pad and went to a meeting with some business folks and showed them what I was sketching out. you would argue under your definition that's a public record. I tend to think that you're going to get a lot of disagreement from lawyers on it. In fact, I have sought out opinions just to see what people would say, and they don't agree with the Town Talk's attorney. But here's where I stand on it, and it kind of solves the problem real easily. I think that you should get the record anyway, because anything that you want to see that we're doing, particularly when it has to do with the formation of a redevelopment consolidated effort, it has nothing to do with any negative audit. This has nothing to do with any investigative piece the Town Talk is working on to show that the city's doing something wrong. I think this has been much ado about nothing on a grand scale. I noted somebody wrote in or told me that one reader called it a tempest in a teapot, and I think there's really no better way to say it. I believe that if I write a note at home and bring it up here, or if I'm thinking about it and you guys want it, that you should get it just because you asked. If I am in use on a particular item or it's out to the auditor, if there was a record that you sent in and we had it checked out to an auditor, or if a member of the staff was currently working on the slides, there has to be some meaning to the term in use. And I think most public lawyers think that that's what it means. It means if they're actually working on that item. Does it mean they have to have it in their physical hands, which is the Town Talk's position, at least as it was related to me? I don't think so. I think that's unreasonable. I think it's an unreasonable construction of that rule. But I would say this again, to your question, Ms. Donicus, anything that we do, whether it's a public record or not, if you ask me, I'm going to give it to you. And that's what we've done as of today.
But you did say earlier it was a draft form.
I don't think draft is the touchstone of any issue. That is something you guys are suggesting, but I've never said. I don't think a draft allows you to withhold anything. In fact, the public records law is very clear that drafts are public records. There are only certain drafts, audit notes and things that have a specific exemption in the law. But I don't think that by something being a draft, it's exempt. I think you're entitled to drafts. In a weird sense, Mr. Bonnette, you could probably come to my door, look through the doorway, see me writing on a piece of paper, have a public records request in your hand with a blank space, fill in what Mr. Roy is holding right now, give it to my secretary, and if I got it, because technically, if we have it right then, you get it, unless I argued it was in use because it was in my hands, you'd be entitled to it. But I think that's a tortured interpretation, and I think that, you know, rational folks tend to think that that doesn't make a lot of sense. Any more questions about it?
That'd be fine for now.
Okay, I'm sure there'll be more later. I would just ask the citizens at home to remember that although this has turned into a discussion about public records, this administration has been more transparent than I think the law requires us to be, but that's what we promised to be. We continue to act that way. Members of the Town Talk staff have on more than one occasion told me, even in the recent days, you're too transparent, and that's what led to this. That it actually, by showing a preview at a meeting, that's what led to you getting these questions. And so we appreciate that. We've sort of looked at it tongue-in-cheek in a lot of ways. I want to say that I recognize the Town Talk's position and respect it very much. I think that they are in a position to have to ask for things and not have someone else interpret or tell them what it means. That's the whole nature of the public records law. And so I respect their position and will continue to honor their requests. I think that the editorial of Sunday was a bit over the top, and I think that when we respond, which will be this Sunday, if the Town Talk lets me, and a my turn editorial from me, I think that I will answer the citizens' questions. And I'm so glad, Mr. Bonnette, that you asked me those things today. By the way, Mr. Bonnette sat in a staff meeting yesterday morning in keeping with our transparency, and we always go out of the way to copy records and get you what you need. I know there are some thoughts about litigation and items in litigation that we don't always agree on. I apologize, but I think we can't sacrifice expert reports and review of things when we're in litigation. That would be something I think would actually be malfeasance on my part to do. On the Spark items, I think you should get anything that has to relate that relates to Spark, whether it's a public record or not. And we may never agree on that, but I think you should get it anyway, and you have. And I think you had it all before the Sunday editorial, and I think you had it all, at least the information that was there. And if the stories were about reporting the information, we wouldn't be in this discussion. But I think the story is really about how something was asked for, and I think that's a shame, to be honest, but that's okay. More questions?
It'll be fun.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bonnette.
There's more I can
I'm let out of the hot seat.
Another question.
Thank you, Tom, for asking me that.
I thought you might appreciate it.
Hey, well, I thought it was very nice of you.
All right, Ken. Get out of here.
Yeah, what should it do?
Appreciate it, John.
No, thank you.
It should just be.
You got everything.
I got it now.
I really don't know who's handling it.
You need to explain that to John because.
All right, yeah.